Welcome to the SGS Sustainability Expertise interview series on greenhouse gas and climate-related reporting. I'm your host, Adam Hammis, the ESG Technical Business Development Director for SGS North America. Our guest today is Austin Whitman, CEO of the Change Climate Project, and we're going to be talking about the evolution of climate certifications. Thank you for being here, Austin.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
I want to talk about the history of the Climate Change Project, or the Change Climate Project. I'll screw that up a couple times probably while we're here. There's some big news about the future, but I knew you from my days in the convenience retail days with the convenience store chain. SGS recently worked on a project last year with a small frozen food Chicago company, but you created this certification program a while ago. Can you share the whole impetus for why it got started and where it's come today?
Yeah, well, it did start a while ago, 5.5 years to be specific. And, it's interesting. Like any startup, there was no sort of one reason why we launched the organization, but the real spark for the original idea came from this observation that there was no label, no single clear symbol that companies could use to talk about carbon emissions in a world that's got 400, 500 eco labels. Really, there seemed to be this huge gap around an issue that is the fundamental environmental issue of our time, which is climate change and directly carbon emissions from companies. And the trend on the consumer side is really toward people who really care a lot more about climate and carbon and sustainability. So, every single way you slice it, the data show that companies really need to respond to a majority of consumers who are concerned, alarmed, aware, and really want companies to do more. And the results are positive as well. The sales data on sustainably marketed products suggest that anywhere between 5 to 7 times better performance comes from products that are sustainably marketed. So all those are really positive drivers. But again, back in 2019, there really wasn't a clear symbol to show that companies are taking responsibility, taking accountability for their carbon emissions. And so we thought, well, why can't we launch something that's like a USDA organic label, but for climate, but for carbon? So that was the first place that the kind of innovation started. And we went out and we talked to, within the first couple months, literally hundreds of companies. And the first question after they got interested in the idea was, okay, cool, how do we do that? And we didn't have a great answer to that question because at the time, there really hadn't been a lot of innovation on the software side for carbon measurement and carbon management. And so we rounded up a team of PhDs and folks who've been working on life cycle assessment for their whole careers and built what at the time was a very simple tech platform. We thought that maybe we would retire it in a couple of years once the market caught up. But we still run that as a really interesting offshoot of the labeling and the certification program, because companies without fail are looking for better ways to get started on carbon measurement. And what's interesting is as that platform has evolved, it's become sort of a gateway to other solutions that are in the marketplace. So I think the ideal model is someone comes to us and says, hey, we're looking for a way to measure our emissions. They use our software, but then they also work with consultants. They work with other data providers to enhance the richness of the inventory that they come up with so that they get greater insights into where their emissions are coming from and what they can do about them. So, yeah, it all started with this idea that there was a gap, that consumers really cared, companies should be responding, but there wasn't a clear symbol. And then here we are 5.5 years later, still running these two programs, the label and the certification, as well as the tech platform.
That is fantastic, because there's three things that have always impressed me about your program. One is the B software tool. You automate the hard work for participants. Two is the community. You list certified companies in this online directory, but you connect them to share best practices. And three is the label. It's simple, attractive, easy to understand, goes on products, and it helps increase sales. And I work with a lot of small, medium-sized companies. I think those are amazing and important. So you really knocked it out of the park in my book. And in that way, you remind me a lot of B Lab and their B Corp certification, which is much broader than climate change, obviously. But, that's me fawning over you. Why do you think the program works so well for your clients?
Yeah, one of the things that we've really just been 100% committed to since the beginning is clarity and simplicity. It's amazing how many different PDFs are out there, how many different prescriptions and instruction manuals. But when somebody picks any one of those PDFs up, chances are they won't come away with a clear sense of, okay, what do I do next? And so we've always really been focused on kind of the clarity, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and so on. That's been a real focus of ours. And we've taken that approach as we've built out the different aspects of our program by making workshops and education available to people that really follow a clear path, where they know where they're starting and they know where they should be by the end of it. We've also supported that, of course, with the software platform, which provides a tool for companies to, in a very self-service way, start to analyze their carbon emissions. And the functionality of the platform has increased over time, so that we're now not just analyzing emissions, but we're actually providing recommendations about reductions and things that people can do to improve their carbon intensity over time. The other thing that we've done is we've realized that we can't achieve the impact that we want without partners involved. And so we've made a big focus in the last couple of years in expanding partnerships with service providers like SGS, as well as a bunch of retail platforms, REI, Ulta Beauty. We've been working with a large home goods company, retailer recently. These platforms, these partnerships allow us to get out and touch more companies in their network, and to kind of pick them up wherever they are on their journey. One of the things that I think is really important is that climate leadership from an NGO's perspective really requires meeting companies where they are and then sort of pulling them forward into climate work. Not every company is set up to be a climate expert and to be optimizing for its carbon emissions. So you really have to provide content, tools, a pathway that's clear, that meets people where they are. And then the final piece, of course, has been closing the loop with consumers. If we can't create a way to convey all of this in a very simple manner to consumers, then it's really hard to make the business case. And so we have done a lot of work to get the folks that we work with to be able to market their certification in a clear and credible way to their consumers. We do social media campaign activation. We create content that allows people to tell their climate stories. We have what I think is the clearest summary description of these companies' climate actions that exists on the internet, which is in the form of our brand profile pages. It's something that I wish every single company in the world had, because it really steps through very, very clearly how many tons of carbon emissions the company measured, what they're doing about them, how much money they're spending, what their plans are to reduce their emissions. And these are just so fundamental to any climate strategy that we really want this format to become standardized across a much broader base of companies. So I guess the final thing I'll say is that we've really tried to emphasize, in addition to all the things I just mentioned, just breaking down barriers to knowledge. The concepts behind carbon measurement and carbon management are really not that complicated. The hard part is building political support, building support for funding decarbonization within your company. And so we try to make the easy stuff easy, I like to say, and then let the hard stuff, kind of be the thing that you really have most of your time focused on solving.
And I'm glad you brought that up as far as like the profile pages, everything. But again, it reminds me of B Corp, but it's easier to understand, I think, because B Corp has multiple categories and scores. And at least on climate action, climate change, you're talking about one thing. I think consumers can understand it when they come and hear one topic, but you're really kind of brushing over you're painting with a broad brush when you're talking about B Corp scores. I just think that the community you're building, the advocacy, it's a really well-designed program. So just my hat is off to you, and you're going through some big changes. And so I don't want to spend any more time focused about the past, but what's shifting. So the Change Climate Project, your certification program is, I don't know how big of change you would think it is, but why do you feel this change needed to happen, first of all, and what is it?
Yeah, so it's been an exciting year for us because we've had the chance to nearly wrap up a process that we started at the beginning of last year. And really two things started happening at the beginning of 2023. Number one was that we were hearing more and more from companies that in our certified brand community that they wanted to be able to be recognized for the investments that they're making in decarbonizing their operations and their supply chain. This is a big surprise because the conventional rhetoric is companies, when told to do something about climate change, will be inclined to spend some money on carbon credits and then just call it a day. We found the opposite to be true. Once companies have the opportunity to start on their climate journey, they get deeper and deeper into it and realize that the money that they're spending on climate initiatives would be much better for the business if it were directed to making permanent decarbonization progress within their operations. So we did hear a lot from companies that they wanted to be able to get credit for the money that they're spending within their operations and supply chain to decarbonize. That was number one. Number two was we saw a tremendous amount of evolution in both kind of the attitudes toward company greenwashing, and then more directly, the regulation, particularly in Europe, against company greenwashing. And even more specifically, there have been a couple legislative packages in Europe that really make it hard to say anything about neutrality and net zero and any other type of claim that makes it sound to consumers like you as a company have it all figured out, like you've made it to the finish line, like you've solved climate change, or at least done your part to solve climate change. And so this combination of kind of being asked by companies to credit more of their value chain investments and this pressure on the regulatory side that's really moving companies away from neutrality-based claims got us thinking about how we could evolve the framework and then in a related way evolve the actual certification mark to be building a more future-proof and resilient kind of approach for companies when it comes to their emissions. What we didn't want to do was chuck everything out, because we've learned a lot over the last 5 years, and we wanted to make sure that we're building on what we had rather than just, again, tearing up the playbook and starting over. So we kept many elements in the framework, but through the course of about 14 months of stakeholder conversations and surveys and working groups, and then a beta testing process, we basically landed on a framework that keeps the same approach to measurement that we've always had. So the cradle to customer boundaries that we require companies to measure, those remain the same. We also are keeping the same approach to getting very specific about how companies are thinking about their reduction targets and reduction plans. We also have kept roughly the same set of rules around things like carbon credits and renewable energy certificates, what's called BVCM on this chart, beyond value chain mitigation. And we also have kept a lot of the same requirements around reporting and the disclosure that I mentioned earlier on the brand profile pages. That will also continue. What we've added is a new mechanism that we call a climate transition budget. There's great data out from CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, showing that what most companies who have set targets are fundamentally missing is an answer to how they're going to fund those targets, how they're going to fund the work to achieve those targets. And so the climate transition budget really puts a fine point on the funding piece of it. We require companies to set that budget by adopting an internal carbon fee that's based on the standard. And then that budget can be used for a combination of value chain investments and beyond value chain. And then we've also added what we call other contribution investments. And those other contribution investments are going to be things like advocacy, climate justice focused projects, employee engagement and enablement. So all kinds of things that are meant to affect broader system change that may not within the next 1 or 2 years lead to direct emission reductions, but that are really critically important and valuable for the progression of the climate movement. So it's a combination of old elements and then some new elements that were workshopped heavily, both with our expert stakeholders and then through these surveys that we did, and then ultimately road tested through a beta process that included about 20 companies from our community.
Well, just to recap, some of the things I love about the new changes, because you mentioned them all, but just not that you're moving away from offsets, you're not getting rid of them, but you're adding this category of, and to me, it's really, yes, companies were, we hope, also investing in reducing, because the next year, there's sort of that delay. If you make an investment, it should show up in your inventory, in your carbon footprint, that it's lower if you did invest, but there is a delay. And so companies were essentially being asked, especially these small, medium-sized companies who have tight budgets, tight on resources, tight on labor. They're supposed to do both, invest in carbon reduction, but also buy offsets. And so it feels like you're doing double time for a small company. That's not easy, where you're actually saying, well, if you're going to invest money, one, you're setting a price for it, which is nice, because I've also seen people shop around for the cheapest thing possible in different markets. And your rules are very well established for what makes a good offset and which don't. But those small, medium-sized companies can say, we're going to invest this money in a reduction now, value chain abatement, and get credit for it, and not have to also, on top of that, go buy credits on the marketplace. But then for me, that ties into investment. A lot of small, medium-sized companies are still looking for investment. I think for an investor who might want to support a company who's small and growing, and that they actually would see this as, hey, the label can add sales, it can show you as a reputational benefit that you're doing this, but this money isn't just going into a credit, which is just an expense. It's going into an investment in an operational improvement somewhere in a fuel or an energy management for a facility. Or to me, there's just so many attractive things about allowing companies to get credit for actual investment in the value chain that, to me, that's really huge. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that comes out. I see like impact investment funds at colleges and local levels, like, hey, we can help this actually make sense to us. Nobody wants to invest in a carbon credit offset necessarily. They don't see that as an investment, but a new piece of equipment or a fuel switch for a supplier, like those could be seen as investments.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things that we've seen as we've gone through this beta testing process and asked companies to itemize the investments that they're making to decarbonize is that in general, an investment that will reduce emissions has other benefits as well. And so the carbon savings value of a given investment is only a piece of the value of that project. And that's exciting because it means that carbon reductions are now part of a really strategic decision that's being made by a business. If I'm deciding to implement a new material in my supply chain because it fits with the future of product line, and that material is lower carbon, that's the kind of decision that is not just, you know, getting the sustainability person all excited. It's getting the product people, it's getting the marketers, it's getting the CEO excited as well, because that carbon benefit is actually a fundamental kind of a core attribute to whatever that material is. And this is true. We've seen companies wanting to invest in small carbon capture devices within their supply chain. I mean, companies that you would never think would be, you know, leading the climate movement, but they're investing in this equipment because they know that it will yield benefits down the road. So we've seen all sorts of interesting things happening, but I think all of it ties back to the point that you made, which is that once you start to credit and recognize the money that goes back into the value chain, you're opening up a whole new way of looking at decarbonization, because it turns it into more of an opportunity that generates a return, as opposed to just fundamentally a tax where the money goes out the door. And I do want to be clear that all the money that people spend on beyond value chain mitigation has climate benefit. And so we've always been very, very clear with companies that at the very least, if every company in the world accounted for its emissions by buying carbon credits, we'd be light years ahead on reducing emissions as a global community versus where we are today. But it's harder to build the business case for that approach than it is to build the business case for investments that are more fundamental and that are delivering the multiple streams of return that seem to come from these more complex and deeper decarbonization projects.
Absolutely. And good programs like yours that have strict rules on which offsets are allowed and permitted do maintain that additionality, so that there's a real tangible benefit, or there's meant to be. And you mentioned that there's a beta program. I knew about it because SGS, we missed the deadline. We were trying to get in with a client, Black and Bold Coffee, which I'm very excited about. We are excited to kick off the next round with you. But tell us a little bit about that beta program. How many companies participated? Who were they? And how did it go? And did it go the way you had hoped?
Yeah, so we had about 20 companies participate in this. Some of them are mentioned here on the slide. It was so much of this journey, and I think this is true of a lot of different areas in the climate movement, was so much of this journey has just been a bit of an experiment, learn and grow, build as you go. And I've really just had so much pride in our team's ability to throw something out there and just see if it sticks or not, and then iterate. That's the way that we need to approach, I think, a lot of the things happening in the climate movement. And I think our organization has been really good at doing that. With this process, we had an initial idea back in January and invited people to participate in the program, knowing that we would run into all sorts of things along the way that we couldn't anticipate because we'd never done it before. But in very sort of startup type fashion, we put together a spreadsheet-based worksheet to collect the data that we were looking for. And then, just to the credit of the folks at the companies on the slide here, as well as the others who participated, there was just a lot of engagement on the right way to report the data, the right way to look at the carbon benefits of different projects that people wanted to count. And we learned just such a tremendous amount. Probably one of the more interesting outcomes was that even over just this very small sample of 20 companies, we came away with an incredibly, I guess I'll say, smooth curve of marginal abatement cost, which is the kind of wonky term for how much it costs a given business to reduce a ton of emissions. And we saw an incredible distribution of projects ranging from about $4 or $5 per ton on internal reductions, all the way up to $700 or $800 per ton. And the insight that we got there really excites us, because as we get more companies to go through this framework, we think we can take what we learn about the marginal abatement cost of different types of projects and share that out with the broader community, so that if a business is coming into this for the first time, a little bit nervous about whether it makes sense for them or how much it's going to cost, we can at least give them some basic pointers on how different types of improvements in their operations will both deliver benefits and also what they're going to cost per ton. So it's really just the beginning of deploying this, but we got to a level of data and insight through this beta process that really, I think, pleased us and left us feeling good about the 2025 standard, which will take effect starting in January.
That is, I mean, we're excited. Obviously, we're going to be participating in that. We get the benefits. Obviously, climate change, very big issue. It's not going to be solved by one company, but I want to hear for you. I don't want it to be lost on people. What's your hope for the work? We're certifying one company at a time, trying to build a community. But say a small coffee roaster, you got Black and Bold. Even if they get certified, they keep doing this work. What's the dream? How does that ripple out into the world and fulfill the bigger purpose of the organization and your certification program?
I mean, climate work and the decarbonization process, it's not going to take off. It's not going to scale unless it is, frankly, something that people can feel good about. And so our hope is that companies like Black and Bold and others launch climate initiatives, maintain and grow those climate initiatives, and whether their annual carbon inventory is 50 tons or 50,000 tons or 5 million tons, that the things that they learn become a part of their story, a part of the marketing that they do, a part of the story that they share with their customers, and that the learning extends into other companies across the climate community. Sustainability people are an amazingly collaborative bunch. I've always just been entertained to see arch competitors at the company level sitting next to each other, collaborating around sustainability progress. We think that the more people participate in this approach, in this model, and sign up to go through the process of measuring their emissions and setting a climate transition budget and identifying projects that they're going to fund, and then sharing the information and learning across the community, the more that happens, just the more impact we're going to have from an emissions perspective. So again, small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses, it all matters. And people need to feel good about the progress, to be able to tell a clear and simple story that excites their customers. And we think that's how this whole thing will continue to scale up.
Well, I love it. And thank you, Austin, for talking with us today. It's been great chatting with you. And if anyone would like to know more about this issue, they can visit changeclimate.org, reach out directly to you. And I hope everyone stays tuned for more breaking news updates with our SGS experts. And thank you for watching.
Thanks, Adam. Good to talk to you.